Every trip into the Blue Mountains starts the same way for me. Watching the landscape roll past the train window, wondering what stories wait just beyond those ridgelines. Today I'm heading toward one of those quieter spots you hear whispers about, a place I've never set foot in before, tucked behind a familiar town, where the bush tends to keep its secrets, unless you're willing to walk for them. Some places don't reveal their secrets all at once. Sometimes you wander in without expecting anything, and the bush decides to show you a little more than what you bargained for. This morning I followed a quiet track up into the back of Leura, one of those forgotten pockets behind the town where nature has reclaimed almost everything. I wasn't here looking for history, but the bush had other ideas. At first glance, I thought it was just a stray piece of steel. But as I got closer, the shape began to make sense. A car, or what was left of one. Swallowed by the bush, forgotten. And then I realised it wasn't alone. Scattered through the trees were the remains of old mid-century cars, the kind you'd expect to see on dusty roads in the 1940s or 50s. The engines long gone, their frames warped by time, and moss creeping quietly through every seam. They've been here for decades, weathered by sun, storms and silence, a strange little graveyard in the middle of the mountains. Cars that once carried families, groceries, dreams, now reduced to shells resting quietly among the bush. So the big question is, why here? Why would the cars end up in a swamp this far from the main road? One explanation goes back to the 1940s and 50s. Back then the mountains had unofficial dumping spots, places where locals pushed old vehicles to the bush edge and simply left them. You can see the old window handle, or the mechanism for the window. Another theory is that the area may have once been an access track, a rough service road for early estates or quarry workers. When cars broke down or bogged, they stayed. Wow, it's still got the old wooden frames on it too. And then there's the simplest theory. This place was out of the way, hidden, quiet, perfect for disposing things no one wanted anymore. If these cars could speak, the explanation would probably be simple, but the truth has settled into the bush with them. Who owned these cars, and what happened that led them to be abandoned out here? That's the question everyone asks, and it's also the hardest one to answer. These cars don't leave behind clues. No plates, no badges, no identifying marks, just shapes being slowly consumed by the bush and vines. But mid-century mountains life gives us a likely story. Back in the 1940s and 50s, cars weren't prize collector items like they are today. They were tools, workhorses, things you pushed until the engine gave out and one last sigh. And when a car died, you didn't call a tow truck, because tow trucks were rare, expensive, and often wouldn't come this far. So people did the simplest thing. They wheeled them to the edge of their land or bush behind their street and left them to nature. So while we may never know the names of the families who once drove these cars, we can imagine a time when this track wasn't a quiet swamp at all, a forgotten back lane when the old vehicles took their final breath. Was this area ever used as an official dumping site or tip for Leura? There's no record of this area ever being a council-approved tip, but that doesn't mean it wasn't used like one. In the early to mid-20th century, waste management in the mountains was chaotic. Large blocks backed straight into bushland. There were no strict rules, no weekly collection, no real understanding of environmental impact, so people improvised. Old fridges, broken furniture, busted farm gear, even entire vehicles were quietly pushed into gullies or rolled toward the nearest low-lying patch of scrub. This informal bush tip sprang up everywhere, not just in Leura, but across the entire ridge, from Blacksland all the way to Mount Victoria. This area likely became one of those unofficial dumping spots, not because anyone planned it, but because it was out of sight, soft underfoot, far from the roads where anyone would care.